Okay, are people introducing themselves? I see a nod, but I don't see any. Oh, there they come in. Great. Awesome. Mindy is coming from North Dakota, from a small nonprofit, and is interested in navigating founder syndrome and how to avoid it for herself. Nice. Welcome. Nonprofit, that makes sense. Lots of awesome founders and nonprofits. And Ricardo is coming from the Sustainable Economies Law Center based in Oakland, because the cooperatives we work with deal with this all the time. Awesome, welcome. Nice to have you. And Aaron is here from DC, working at an international nonprofit that has grown quickly and dealing with the challenges that entails. Definitely lots of challenges with growing quickly. Lots of opportunity also, and around distributed decision making. Great. We'll get into that a little bit today, for sure. And John is here as a founder with founder syndrome and was interested in how people see it. Great. Nice to have you here. And you're in Boston and also London. Great. Glad to have you. And keep introducing yourselves. While you do that, I'll introduce myself and I'll come back to this. Like I said earlier, I'm the communications wizard here at Round Sky. And just to say a bit more is that I have been at Round Sky for about a year. It'll be a year next week. And I live in New Orleans. We all work remotely, so my coworkers live in Vermont. And I've been in New Orleans for about 4 years, but I'm originally from California. And outside of my work with Round Sky, I have a little script here. What do I do outside of Round Sky? I do a lot of work around anti-racist organizing here with a collective and dance, which is really important to me. Both of those, both movement and that. And I'm also really interested in process and how process really brings us forward. So that's a little bit about me. A couple other people joined us. Nice. Glad to have you and your colleague, Erin. If Mia wants to say anything to introduce herself, she can. And Andy from the Boston area, involved with several organizations that have suffered from founder syndrome. And I'm interested in learning more about how others approach this issue. Great. Welcome. So let's keep this moving a little bit. And you can keep introducing yourselves and chat with each other if you'd like. And so to go on, just so you know you're in the right place. In today's webinar, we're gonna discuss founder syndrome, as you can tell, and learn some tactics about dealing with founder syndrome as an employee and also as a founder. So if you are either of those, we're glad that you're here today. And I will stop there and send this over to Cecile to introduce herself.
All righty, everyone. Well, thank you so much for being here. I'm really thrilled to have you join us for this topic. It's really near and dear to my heart. And so I'm really glad to see all of you showing up for this. I'm really interested to hear what you have to say from your experience. So as Rebecca said, I'm Cecile, and I'm one of the co-founders of Round Sky Solutions, a worker co-op. And I live near Montpelier, Vermont. I've worked for founders, and I train others in how to transition out of founder syndrome. Personally, I've founded more than one organization in my life, and I've participated in other startups where I was not the founder, but worked directly with them. I've seen founders, myself included, provide an invaluable service in birthing an organization, and I've seen the very same people undermine the success of the organizations we founded. So I'd like to start by taking a moment to just share a little bit about my own personal journey, which led to my investigation of founder syndrome. I grew up in Istanbul, Turkey, and as an expat kid, I absorbed a sea of different cultures and perspectives all around me. Really everything from the different ways there were to get something done to the different types of dress one might see in the market. And each of those imprinted a knowledge upon me that there are more ways to see and experience the world than any of us can really imagine. Informed by this early experience, in my teenage years, I began to wonder why it was so hard for humans to get along. I could see that our different ways of seeing and experiencing the world often appeared to be the root of our conflict. After completing a Bachelor of Science at the University of Massachusetts, I was quickly drawn into the life of the social entrepreneur, starting as a farmer. And after about 2 decades of launching and running small businesses, I was hired to help launch an online education company based in California. I was so excited, really looking forward to working with such a progressive organization, but reality is often different than rosy expectations, and that was no different here. The people were great, the vision was amazing, and operating conditions were toxic. In short, what happened was that the founders of the company behaved like a king and queen, reserving all decisions for themselves, commanding everyone else around, and demanding that people be available at all hours of the day and night to respond immediately to their decrees. Sometimes their bad decisions would not only cost the organization lots of money, but also require that people redo weeks of effort for no apparent benefit except to please them. And as you might expect, the people there were deeply disillusioned and responded in different ways, from detaching to whitewashing and excusing their behavior. The parable of the emperor without any clothes provided me with some guidance and solace in that painful and corrosive experience. And after all that, I was driven to take a deeper look into my own experience, and it is my way to try to learn about the causes and construct a way to improve these kinds of situations, because I could see that the experience I and my colleagues were having was hardly unique. In fact, it was very common. So seeking a better way, I was inspired to take a deep dive into organizational and individual development in search of an answer. I was curious what power is and developed some theories about power to map and explain the dynamics I commonly saw in organizations. I synthesized the research I'd been doing with my challenging career experiences, both as a cooperative entrepreneur and in organizations like the one I mentioned earlier. From that research, I created a map of what organizations need to communicate about and a set of processes called CoLab that reliably deliver healthy forms of power in action, including a workable, concrete path to move out of founder syndrome into a thriving organization filled with creative, committed, innovative, and responsive people. I published Collaboration That Works, a ruthlessly practical handbook for a generative world, as a training manual that summarizes this research and introduces CoLab for organizations. So I'm delighted to be here with you exploring ways of actively transcending founder syndrome. Today, we're going to start by looking at a workable definition of founder syndrome, including some of its key symptoms and characteristics, before digging into specific tips and tactics for navigating founder syndrome, first from the perspective of those of us who work with founders in one way or another, followed by some thoughts about the perspective of being a founder. We'll wrap up with some next steps you can consider for yourself and a Q&A. So let's take a moment to look at a definition of founder syndrome. Founder syndrome refers to the challenges associated with organizations that have one or a few strong personalities in power, usually the individuals who started the organization, but sometimes also applies to charismatic leaders who have assumed power after an organization was formed. It's important to remember that founder syndrome is an organizational problem with causes stemming from both the founder and the followers. We'll start by looking at the problem from the perspective of employees and then move on to the founder. It's also important to keep in mind that founder syndrome can occur in any type of organizational legal structure, meaning it can happen in nonprofits, cooperatives, corporations, civic organizations, or even organizations without a formal legal structure. In other words, founder syndrome is more fundamental than legal structure, although legal structure can have an impact for sure. So as we move on, I want to take a little time to talk about the symptoms. These include, but are not limited to, the following: Decisions really are made by the founder, often without input from others. The founder is deferred to in all matters, regardless of their actual expertise. The founder is the cornerstone of the organization's identity. Snap decisions and decision reversals are common without any explanation, warning, or consideration of impact. Information flow through the organization is stilted or actively stifled, with the founder at the center of all information flows. Planning courses of action and setting priorities are usually the purview of the founder. And employees can often feel like they're paid not to think, but to simply deliver on orders, which themselves can be changed at the drop of a hat, undoing weeks of effort. If the organization has a board, that board is often filled by people who are loyal to the founder and not likely to countermand anything the founder has said or done. And proposals for change coming from any direction other than the founder are usually expertly resisted, even actively discouraged. Founders often have an inner circle of people that they trust, to whom implicit power is conferred through their proximity to the founder. So I'm curious if anyone on the line here wants to add other symptoms of founder syndrome that you've experienced just into the chat box, and Rebecca will read some of those off for all of us.
And while you all think of what extra things that you've experienced or seen in yourself, I'll just elaborate on one, that there is also a sense of being the star of a team, or the hero, and that everything would fall apart if it weren't for you, which all important movements are based on a team effort, right? Like, we often have these heroes and stars in our workplaces and our movements, but in reality, no one ever does anything alone. So that's something that I've experienced in a few different places. And Mary is adding that founder has become detached, diving into their own projects while the rest of their team collaborates. Use of wording that refers to I or my or me in place of the organization in general absolutely becomes their identity in some ways, which probably isn't good for anybody. Entitlement from the original founders. Yeah, and then they make independent decisions, absolutely. Which in some cases, depending on a decision-making structure, decisions could be made by the founder, who maybe is the executive director of a nonprofit, but in our cooperatives or in places where you want decision-making that's really based on the organization, that gets a little messy. Difficulty letting go and delegating, absolutely. Great examples. Disempowering for our participants, hinders participation. Yeah, keep them coming. And you can continue on, Cecile, if you'd like.
Great, yeah. It sounds like many of you have experienced some of these happenings within your own team. And it can be deeply troubling and difficult on both sides to really know where to go. So I'm going to list some of the characteristics of founders that are particularly susceptible to founder syndrome. Often there's a charisma, also a love of kind of shooting from the hip, combined with a distaste for structure and process, claiming it cramps their style, a reluctance to cede meaningful power to others, a tendency towards narcissism, desire to surround themselves with people who are loyal to them, and prefer or are able to follow with little question. So it's critical in these situations to hold in mind that the founder is just another person doing their best, and that they are likely unaware to what extent their behavior is responsible for conditions in the organization. They may also be unaware that conditions are unhealthy because from their perspective, nothing may seem awry. However, demonizing the founder, even if they are clearly contributing to toxic conditions, will not support a generative way forward. So I'd like to take a step back and offer my hypothesis on the fundamental power dynamics at play, which I've written in greater detail about in my book and academic articles. please take a look if you're interested. Essentially, if power is defined as the force of enactment, then founders are being given or are taking a disproportionate amount of power. When power is concentrated in any given individual, their brains literally change over time, reducing neural pathways that foster empathy. And you can see a quote here from a recent article on this subject. Research on this is coming through, but there isn't a lot. So it's fascinating that there is as much as there is. So yeah, power can really, when it happens over time and is concentrated, it really can change our personalities and our ability to see and respond to other people. I'd also like to emphasize that not every founder or charismatic leader will fall prey to these tendencies, but the percentage of leaders who develop these symptoms is very high, with some huge negative impacts to our daily work for themselves and their team. So let me also underscore the role that those of us play who support founders unconditionally by not holding them accountable and not giving them relevant and difficult feedback. We too are implicated in this phenomena of founder syndrome that can have such a pervasive and corrosive effects on our work environments. So let's take a look at the list of consequences. Disempowerment, disengagement, that's very common. Increasing politicking to get one's way, siloed teams, behind the scenes bickering, bullying, higher than normal turnover, expensive mistakes that are brushed off. Systems and processes that support the founder's authority are usually implicitly maintained even if they create other problems and bottlenecks. And often, unfortunately, individuals that disagree with the founder are eliminated or sidelined and silenced. There's an inability to form meaningful connections between team members, and an air of secrecy and fear can kind of hang over the organization, where it can be risky to even talk about these problems with a teammate. And the founder often feels isolated, overworked, underappreciated for their sacrifices. Now, not many of us would really want to choose to work in such an environment, but we may unwittingly end up there. And I would love to hear if there's any other experiences that people would like to add to this list of consequences that you've seen play out in your workplaces.
Yeah, and go ahead and put those in the chat box as well. Some of the things that have happened in your workplace because of founder syndrome or because of a founder that is taking over in some ways.
Looks like there's some great comments coming through. Are you sharing those, Rebecca? Looks like Rebecca might have frozen up there a bit, so I will read off some of these while she joins us back again. But yeah, limited ability of a founder to move on. It pushes out people who will disagree for sure. There's an inability to go over issues as a group. And yeah, bottlenecking and the difficulty in delegating effectively. Missed opportunities to partner and collaborate with other groups because of the leader's strong personality and inflexible vision. These are all really great. I hope you can see through and read some of these other comments. And I will keep us rolling here. So the real question is, once we face a toxic work environment, is what to do about it. And the first tip I would offer you is to evaluate your circumstances carefully. Sometimes the best course of action is to get out. And again, we'll talk about this from the founder's perspective in a minute, but confronting a founder who is deeply enmeshed in founder syndrome can result in your being fired or demoted. I've had that experience myself several times. And the time really for confronting a founder is before they get too far down the pipe with the founder syndrome. And so my advice is this: first of all, evaluate the number of symptoms actively and their severity. And if you can safely review your evaluation with another coworker, do so, because your perception may be skewed. So it's always great to check with someone else. If your conclusion is that the rating of the situation is moderate to severe and you're not willing or able to stick around with this harmful power dynamic, I recommend that you make your exit plan. The issue here is that once a founder is deeply enmeshed in these dynamics, their perception of themselves and their situation becomes skewed to support the primacy of their perspective. And confrontation of that self-image can be experienced as a threat to the whole company, to the whole organization. And therefore, logically, the founder will take whatever action they need to protect the company and the organization. So, all right, well, let's move on to talking about some of the tactics. If your rating of the situation is mild to moderate, I recommend thinking about these tactics. First of all, identify what's not working in the organization from the founder's perspective. Pick one or two and set a time to meet with them privately to discuss the ideas you have about how to solve the problem. Meeting with them collectively, while maybe a good idea, can put them further on the defensive. And so just carefully evaluate, again, in your situation, what you think is going on. And if they're defensive, they're less likely to hear what you have to say. So ideally, you want them really in a good place to hear what you have to say. In that meeting, suggest some experiments as to how they might alleviate the problem, and I'll speak to some specific solutions in a moment. And then settle on a plan with them for moving forward. Get it written down and set regular report dates to check in with them to find out how it's going from the founder's perspective and yours as well. Once one of the problem areas is showing some improvement, pick the next area and address that with an eye for continual improvement. So some specific tips for you to consider. If your founder is overworked, consider alleviating them. Often they get to the point where they feel trapped in their roles and overworked. And for this particular dilemma, I recommend helping the founder write down all the work they are concretely doing in the form of roles and their corresponding accountabilities. From there, help the founder identify which of those roles they would be most happy to be relieved of, and suggest finding someone else in the organization who could take those on, or hire someone. Next idea is effective collaborative meetings. Another means of alleviating founder bottlenecks is to get them out of facilitating meetings if they are doing so. And if meetings aren't happening, this is a great opportunity to institute them. Make certain that the meeting processes you choose have a clearly defined role for the facilitator and the scribe or note taker, and that the decisions, next actions, and other outputs determined in each meeting should be recorded in a transparent location for all team members. In addition, make sure all team members of the team can and know how to raise agenda items for the meeting. Perhaps the most important aspect of this is to give the power to the person raising the item for identifying which solutions will incrementally move their issue forward. And then make sure those are consented to by the whole team, not just the founder, before getting recorded in writing. So in this particular example, I just want to point out that we are very slowly and incrementally passing power to everyone who's involved in a body of work, and including the founder in those decisions and that process, but not making them the go-to for all of that. Next item I'll suggest is collaborative decision-making. And really, having a clear collaborative decision-making process that is effective, consistent, and efficient is transformative. This process should include all the voices on a team in the decision-making and not limit the decisions to the founder, though it should include a mechanism for integrating objections from any team member, including the founder. And those objections should rotate around anything that would cause harm to the organization. Note that your team should decide who can make which decisions without the consent of the full team, which goes back to creating explicit roles with each person on the team. And another idea for you to consider is a transition to a worker-owned company. This really only applies in situations where a founder is ready to retire, and either by selling or just moving on. But this solution can take at least 9 months to several years to implement, so be prepared to stick in there for the long haul. Working to help an organization transition out of founder syndrome is sometimes a thankless task, really, because since if it's done well, the work you are doing may be invisible. However, the benefits to you and the rest of your colleagues will be experienced far outweigh the lack of credit you may receive. And if you would like to receive more support on your particular situation, please do reach out to us directly to schedule a free consultation. And before we transition into talking about the founder's perspective, I want to invite any of you on this call to let us know via the chat if you found other ways of successfully working with founder syndrome. And Rebecca will catch some of those and read those off if she is back with us. Rebecca, are you back with us now?
I'm back.
Wonderful.
Great. So just to reiterate, any other experiments that people have tried or shifts that people have seen that have worked for you or like started towards working for you, right? I don't think there's only one right way. Or as a founder, maybe you can speak to something that you think might work. Just put that right in the chat box.
Okay, great. Well, we'll have more time to circle back to those comments in our Q&A. So I'm going to move us on to taking a look at this whole situation from the founder's perspective. And yeah, so being a founder is not easy. I know from personal experience. And the first thing to really understand here is that as founders, we also suffer from founder syndrome. This isn't fun for anyone. And the fact that we might have more power doesn't equate necessarily to more well-being. It may, sometimes it does, but it doesn't necessarily correlate. We too may be trapped in our roles, feel a great deal of responsibility to the whole organization, and really not know what to do differently. So here are some of the symptoms that founders caught in founder syndrome may be experiencing. I'd love to hear from you again. If you've got others, please type them into the chat box. Being overworked with the sense that everyone is relying on you. Everyone comes to you with their questions, even if you don't have the answers for them. A sense of feeling isolated, alone, afraid that you will let everyone down. Spending too much time in the weeds of the organization and not enough on the big picture. Decision fatigue, being the one to make all or many of the decisions in the organization can lead to exhaustion and reduce one's ability to make good decisions, actually. A sense of being on the pedestal, and any attempt you make to come down off it can be met with hostility or suspicion. A feeling of being trapped, underappreciated, and criticized behind your back, while at the same time being adulated. It's really an interesting kind of both and there. So founder syndrome is not just caused by power-hungry narcissists that seek to dominate an organization. This can sometimes be the case, but more often than not, founder syndrome is the product of both leaders and followers. Frankly, many people just want a strong leader to rely on, and they shy away from responsibility and pressure. They want to be able to leave their job at the office and go home carefree. Being a leader holding a lot of responsibility can be challenging and painful. And if you also care, then it definitely goes on with you and it's going to wake you up in the middle of the night. The pleasant side of being a founder can be hard to find, and it can seem nigh impossible to get out of the dilemma of your position, short of walking away from the whole thing. So let's take a look at some concrete solutions. What can we actually do about this? The good news is that there are some remarkably effective tactics that you as the founder can implement to get yourself and your organization out of founder syndrome. And I'm going to start with the biggest picture solution that I have to offer you and then get into some more details. But use the power you have to implement a collaborative operating system throughout your organization. Now, what do I mean by that? The first and most effective thing and far-reaching is to do this. But what is an operating system? Essentially, all organizations have operating systems, communication operating systems that have to do with the way that people communicate around their work. And often they are implicit, really not consciously constructed to deliver the desired outcomes. So implementing a collaborative one will enable you to distribute the power you currently hold to others in your organization and have them hold each other accountable. That's taking you out of the bottleneck you're in. Distributing power to others doesn't mean that you lose control over everything that's happening, which would be scary indeed and inadvisable. Any transition like this must be given the time it needs to happen incrementally with checks and balances. So if you're curious about organizational operating systems, please do check out Colab. We've researched it, synthesized it, and tested it. And one of the benefits of a collaborative operating system is that it will enable you and the organization to collectively revisit and clarify as needed some key things, like your purpose, your business model, your strategy, and all of your governance. For example, purpose, which I see as vision, mission, and values, is the North Star that guides an organization at all times. And when it's defined collaboratively, the power you hold as a founder will begin to safely and incrementally transfer to the whole organization without your losing control of what the purpose is, because your voice is included in that process. In addition, a comprehensive operating system will also include professional, personal development for everyone on staff, which will give you as the founder support for your own growing edges and also give you an explicit mechanism for ensuring your staff is developing in line with your organizational leadership needs that you see are needed. So next solution I want to suggest is to clarify your decision-making process, including who has the authority to make what decisions without you. So creating this standard for decision-making can be liberating for both you and employees. However, it's really critical to choose one that can reliably work. There's nothing more disappointing than trying something and having it fail, although that happens too, and it's good learning. There are a lot of decision-making models out there, and you may choose to use more than one, as we recommend in Colab, but it's important that the entire organization understand which type of decision-making should be employed. We also recommend a collaborative decision-making process like integrative consent for the benefits that come from rapidly including the perspectives of the people who are impacted by a decision. And we'll be sending out a step-by-step process for that in our follow-up email to you. Next thing to consider is to make your power and the power of others explicit by clarifying the roles that you are holding and determining which ones you want to pass on. And then making that official by explicitly passing the authority to make these decisions regarding their roles. In other words, you give authority to the person holding the role to enact that role as best they see fit. Now, this part can get a little tricky if you as the founder are unwilling or unable to confer that authority and relinquish your right to manage their work. It doesn't mean that you must give up control, again, of quality or priorities. In fact, you actually gain more control using a team-based priority setting process and inviting all team members to contribute to the creation of policies that cross-check work in line with explicit standards. If you find you are in a position to also have to train the individuals filling new roles, I recommend you create a trainer position for yourself that is temporary, but with the authority to pass on how things have worked in the past, with the understanding that this new individual may choose to do things differently. And as long as that isn't causing harm to the organization, you agree to step back and let them have the autonomy to deliver on that role as they best see fit. We will also send a step-by-step process for role generation in our follow-up email. Clarifying all the roles in an organization will also set you up to onboard new people more easily and transition yourself out of the organization when you are ready to do so. This step sets you up to do succession planning, which is essential if you want to consider the long-term health of your organization. So let's take a look at the next tip, setting up a collaborative accountability system. This will help you reduce the number of hours you spend in one-on-one meetings with your direct reports. And this is an incredibly effective way of getting yourself more time. So if you're struggling with time, think about how you are meeting with your direct reports. And it will also increase the capacity of your team to lead. And so I recommend instituting a team-based, rapid-fire, collaborative accountability system, including a transparent location for project and task tracking. This task tracking system can be virtual or physical, really just depends on the needs of your team. And the key here is to make reporting back on target projects part of a regular meeting process. So it's anticipated, it's regular, happens all the time, and followed by an opportunity for questions, comments, and appreciations on those projects. Any detailed discussion of an item should be saved for the main agenda segment of the meeting. This process will enable the whole team to be much more in sync and informed, reducing the amount of information that has to flow through you in order for the organization to function well. And let's move on to explicitly encouraging others to build the agenda during your meetings. In addition to sort of explicitly asking and inviting others to raise their tensions as agenda items during meetings, make sure that you have a facilitator that's not you. And there's a lot of reasons for this, but one is, again, we're working on distributing power, and the facilitator has a lot of power. And if you already have a lot of power in your roles, then it's best if someone else has that. And you really also want an effective process for ensuring that the outcome of agenda items moves forward the issues raised by the person that raised that issue. Over time, this practice will build the shared leadership capacity of your team. It will also institute a mechanism for continuous improvement in the organization that's independent of your own perceptions, but without diverging from what you know as a founder would cause harm to the organization. So on that note, I would love to invite, again, if there's any founders on the call, we'd love to hear from you. If you tried anything else that you want to share with the rest of us, whether it's worked or not, you can just let us know. But we'd love to hear from your experience on this topic.
Yeah, there were a few earlier. Just scroll back up to it. One person said, be bold in leading from within, bring up issues when I can, for example, in performance reviews. Yeah. And clearly defined roles and accountabilities that can be shifted to new individuals, rotating roles on regular schedule. Create an appreciative, honoring environment, communicate, be open to feedback with solutions or ideas. Absolutely.
Those are fantastic.
Great.
Yeah, and I'll just circle back to the first bullet point I offered for founders is implementing a collaborative operating system. When all of those points, like being appreciative, taking feedback well, speaking up when you need to, when those are part of the culture of how we all communicate with each other, it tends to work a lot better than if there's just a few individuals who are doing it sporadically. For a lot of good reasons. One is that people can sort of get into a habit better that way, and kind of the knowledge and experience of those of us who can do that better can be conferred to others, but it's done explicitly rather than just expecting other people to step in line and follow our example. So that's one of the really powerful things about implementing an explicit operating system based on certain values. Everyone knows what's expected of them and what to expect of others.
Yeah, absolutely. There was also a few additions of be vulnerable, willing to share that I don't have all the answers, or that the founder doesn't have all the answers and can make mistakes. Absolutely. And somebody's found that simply starting every decision discussion with what would you do if you were me starts the right discussion and to get people to think. And creating the culture, yes, there's an exclamation point. It's great practice for giving and receiving appreciation. Absolutely. For everyone, right? I think founders need that because it also reinforces what they're doing great, that feels good in a team, and also feedback what doesn't feel great with I think anybody on your team that should happen. Not easy to make happen always. Like the beginning is pretty hard if you don't have that culture, but it can be created with practice.
Nice.
Great.
Those are really rich. Thank you all. So really, including all of the suggestions that have just been made, these are the ones I've seen work for preventing and transitioning out of founder syndrome. And I want to encourage you to give them a try, though I would offer a caveat that having an expert facilitator through a transition out of founder syndrome can be extremely helpful for navigating the details of your situation. And we have more resources to support you on your journey, which Rebecca is going to tell you a little bit about now before we move into a Q&A. So off to you, Rebecca.
Great. And if my internet's a little wonky, stop me and let me know, because my computer alerted me that my internet was low. But I'll continue on. So the one easy way for you to take our advice with these tips and get some of the details is our online course, Collab 101, which is right now being offered on a sliding scale, so pay what you can. And in Collab 101, you really learn about how to use that system to create that culture for your team, to tap into all the brilliance of all the people. Somebody had said that they start the discussion off with asking, what would you do? This is kind of a system that does that, right? And Collab 101 also works to help you use the power to implement this operating system throughout your organization and to get alignment on those decisions, so it's not just one person. And to clarify the roles, like we said earlier, and set up a shared task tracking system so that you can get that feedback for yourself and for everyone on your team. And these are some of the highlights that we found people have said they benefit from the most: the meeting facilitation skills and the meeting practices that are really easy to just get into your system right now, and shared tracking and personal development practices. And so that's the main thing. It's an 8-module online course, so you can start today. It's on your own schedule, basically. And so you can ask questions about what that means. I'll send out a link for that as well. And the other things, if an online course isn't for you, but you want some individual support from folks at RoundSky, we do that also. So for your team or for you as a person, if you want coaching without your team as a founder or as a leader, you can do that. Or you can get your whole organization on board as well. So it's whatever your needs are, we have those different ways of supporting you. And you can set up a free call with us to see if what we do will really meet your needs as well. And I can send that link out. So as we go on, there's been some questions. So feel free to type your questions in the chat box, and we'll start with the first one that I got. That's a bit up here. Let me scroll back to it. So Mindy is asking, what are the solutions that addresses the followers, not just the founder, from an employee's perspective? And she, just a little more feedback, that she works with a group where most seem to be fine with the current power dynamics and occasionally encourage reinforced founder syndrome. What are your thoughts on that, Cecile?
Yeah, thank you. And I forget which slide it is, but Rebecca, you want to slip back to that slide that sort of focuses from the employee's perspective, what some of the solutions are. And absolutely, I recommend a really simple and hopefully a non-threatening change to make is to institute collaborative meeting practices. And so that essentially looks like having a concrete structure for your meeting practice that is transparently tracked, that has a facilitator who's not the founder. I recommend electing someone that can often also distribute the power across the team. And frankly, it's fun. It's a fun election process to sort of get everyone involved in choosing who their facilitator will be, also who their scribe will be. Scribing is incredibly important. How outputs are recorded, that's what goes down in history. So those two roles, the facilitator and scribe, are really key. And often meetings don't have them at all, or the roles are not terribly clear, and the power that we're conferring to those two roles is not clear. So making those things clear and standardized and electable are really simple ways to sort of launch an effective meeting practice. And along with that, having a collaborative decision-making model that you use when decisions are needed instead of what's probably happens, which is it just defers to the founder to make a decision, or there's a little discussion, little input, no decisions really made. This process will really help you get to a clear decision that involves everyone's input on the team. So those are some of the easiest places to start in terms of working with founder syndrome. And it's usually not kind of directly confronting a founder, allows them to sort of get used to this idea of including more voices in the process.
Absolutely. And there's been questions about if the recording will be shared and the slides. Yes, I'll share those for sure. Are there other questions about founder syndrome? Maybe there's a specific experience that you're having or something you've tried that you want to use this time to work through. That probably means it's a pretty good webinar if you have no questions.
I'll add another comment from the perspective of a founder that has worked really hard, especially since launching this most recent worker co-op focused on participatory management tools and whatnot, is that I've worked really hard to make sure that I'm not overstepping my roles. So that starts with having very clear what roles I am holding, which therefore confers the power to me to enact those roles. But tempting as it may be at times to be like, ooh, I see something one of my colleagues is doing and I'm like, wow, I don't like that. Like it doesn't personally, like maybe it's the way the colors land on a website or something like that. But if it's not actually causing harm to Roundsky, then my practice as a founder is to step back and say, that's their choice, and to support them in that. And the place where I make a different choice is if I see it causing harm to the organization. And then what I do is I raise an agenda item for our meetings together and we collectively process that. So again, it's not just me shooting from my hip saying this, no, that, yes. And it really changes the dynamic. And for myself, just from a perspective of how that benefits me is that I do not have to stress about all those things that are not mine. I can really let go and let the person who's handling them handle them and learn from what they do well and get feedback on what doesn't work. And we can kind of collectively evolve how we're managing our organization.
Yeah, great. You didn't even see the questions, and that I think that starts to get at them. Another question came up that I feel like that's a good answer. Part of the answer too is, what have been effective tools to get non-founders to step up?
Yeah, I think that's a really tricky question. Thank you for asking that, because again, I mean, the first piece is having people who are willing to take responsibility. So if you have people who really, really want to eschew responsibility, you may want to consider finding other people. So it's kind of a baseline. You need people who are willing to accept responsibility. But the next and perhaps most important step is to make a defined roles with accountabilities in conjunction with your team. So collectively as a team with those people that you're anticipating will step forward, create the roles together. First of all, it's fun. It involves everyone's creativity. It'll be a far better product than if, I just myself do it or you just yourself do it. And you get their buy-in from the get-go, right? They've built this role. So there's much more likelihood that folks are going to be interested and willing. And then the second thing is to hold an election round where the entire team is nominating someone and there's a collective process for passing that. That individual has a chance during the nomination rounds to say if they absolutely won't take the role, and I've done that myself, So there are times when you can absolutely step back, but generally what happens is when there's this collective process, the person feels much more excited and energized and willing, and they're doing this for the team. It's a much different experience than when you as a founder are behind closed doors or trying to get someone to do something. So I just encourage you to give it a try. There's a lot that kind of gets unlocked when you begin to access this collective team potential. And so, yeah, I just encourage you to try it.
Mm-hmm. Great. There's another question here, which maybe that also gets at as well, is how do we encourage team members to participate when they already feel overworked or are not interested in the process?
Those are two different questions. Overworked and not interested. So I'll take them one at a time. I mean, let me just be frank with you. I would be surprised if there were very many of us on this call that aren't overworked. It's somewhat the nature of our modern life. It's the nature of being a mission-driven person. So let's just start with that as a baseline and offer that the solution to overworking that I have found is to have a team collective priority setting process. So that priority setting process enables us to identify which of the initiatives that we have on our horizon are the most important. And those then get our time. So within the allotted time that we've committed to working, let's say it's 40 hours, then you start first with the priority number one that the team has decided. Then it's number two. And that's a little bit linear. It never works quite that way. But basically, you are alleviated from the struggle of trying to juggle way too many priorities all the time, which makes the feeling of being overworked far worse. And having those priorities clear enables you to say, look, when you report out on your projects, I did my projects related to our top targets. They're done. I didn't get to the rest. Those are backlogged. And here's why. And there's no pushback because the team made that decision. And it's clear why those things have been backlogged. And you are less likely to feel the pressure of being overworked and trying to get to everything when that's just impossible. So that's the overworked piece. I would recommend trying a priority setting process with your team. And then for people who aren't interested, I would have a one-on-one conversation with them and find out what's at the root of their disinterest and what they think could be better from their perspective for the organization. Sometimes that one-on-one conversation where you're really inviting them to tell you, that just to lay it out straight, can sort of dislodge an internal disengagement that's happened for them. So that's one suggestion. The other is to give the team process some time. Like by time, I mean 6 months, not 2 weeks. Because what happens is that people who are kind of caught up in the process and expected to participate, usually I find over the course of a few months, their resistance releases. They see the value. They begin to understand why it's important, and so can see the benefits that are accruing to them personally as well as to the team. So kind of seeing something work over time is very effective for overcoming that lack of interest piece.
Mm-hmm. Great suggestions. I would add to the not interested part that when you're having that one-on-one with them, perhaps they're not interested, but they're still willing to consent to the process. And if you can get them to say, yes, I kind of don't care, but I'll do this process anyway, I think that kind of sets you up for maybe caring someday. That's something that in their future. So why are you just willing to try this, I think is a really great question, because trying this means it could be temporary. So if it doesn't work, then we don't need to do it. And we have time for maybe another question after this one. So feel free to put your questions here. Any specific advice for teams that only work remotely and also for a tiny staff size?
Nice.
I didn't ask this question, Cecile, if you're wondering. I'm someone who works on a small staff and remotely.
Yeah, I was just going to say, wow. you called us out. So yeah, I've found a couple of things are really critical for remote teams, and the core of the backbone of that is having what we call a living agenda, which is a simple Google Doc. And perhaps, Rebecca, we can include that template in our follow-up email. And the Google Doc is obviously accessible from everywhere, and you have a visual reference, therefore, during your meetings, not just an audio or visual reference for faces, right? You have a visual reference on the content you're discussing, and that is invaluable for helping to align, make sure we're all talking about the same thing. It helps different learning styles. So there's some, and it kind of ties that remote team together around this document. So that's one piece. A corollary to that is that once you do have decisions you've come to, make sure you have, again, an online, transparent, easily accessible, we use Google Docs, location for a repository of your agreements. So anyone can go and look, right? They're not like flipping through emails or previous agendas or trying to find a decision that you'd made. And the same is true of project tracking. So if you're a remote team, definitely you need a project management system that is online and accessible by everyone. The same project management system. We can look at Rebecca's, we can look at mine, we can look at Daniel's. You know, we have immediate access to see what someone's up to, the most recent updates. That is super critical. And if you don't have, I'm sure you do, if you're a remote team, you must have some communication system for chatting, and there's a lot out there. We use Skype, some people prefer Slack, doesn't really matter. The idea is that you have your protocols around how those are used clear. So for example, you know, we're in general not gonna pass complicated decisions by Skype. Just don't do it. Just don't do it. Save those for your meetings. Save Skype for the quick back and forth during the day that you need on a little detail here, or if someone's running late to a meeting, or they need a little help editing a doc real quick. That's a perfect use of those communication devices. So those are a few thoughts. I hope those are helpful.
Yeah, great suggestions. And I just want to highlight having a regular reporting out of the things you're working on is really helpful for us to get alignment. I notice if we skip a week because of a holiday or something, that I just feel a lot less aligned with my team when we don't check in about what our priorities are for the week. So that, if that's one takeaway for a remote team especially, that's what I would suggest.
Yeah.
Great. Well, it was so great to have you all on the call. I will send out the information that this slideshow and the information in docs that we said we would in the next day, possibly later today, and the recording. And feel free to email us if you have any further questions. We're happy to chat with you. And thanks for all the appreciations in the chat box. Yeah. Okay. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.